Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Freedom Deals Live. So this afternoon we have a very interesting one. So I've had to be a bit cryptic in this because this is actually something I'm currently negotiating on. So we will be a little bit, secretive about a few of the details, but that won't stop us going through the due diligence process. So let me share my screen with you and get started, but let's do an audio and tech check. If you can just pop in the comments that you can hear me, you can see me. And very shortly, you will be able to see my screen. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now. Just make sure of it. No, cannot see my screen just yet. Okay, there we go. All right, so screen will be coming up for you now. It will just look like a long tunnel, but anyway, we'll get started. So yep, quick tech check in the comments. You can hear me, you can see me, and at the moment you should be able to see a very strange screen. Flicking over to a feasibility and also a satellite image now. So just confirm for me that you can see that, and then we'll get started on pulling this deal apart. Yep, looking all good. Ken, excellent. Thanks, Roland. Appreciate it. Okay, kick off. So this is a slightly curious one. So this is one I'm dealing directly with the owner on, which is always the preferred way to do deals, because then you've only got two people to satisfy as opposed to a third party in the middle that you need to satisfy. So as you can tell, this one's at the end of a cul-de-sac. And when you're at the end of a cul-de-sac and you tend to always have these slightly oddly shaped blocks, that can both be an opportunity and it can be a limitation. Because first of all, opportunity, okay, there are some leniencies around how these sorts of things work in the cul-de-sacs. The limitations is, as you can see, and as I'm kind of implying with that very crude mud map there, is you can end up with some very interesting boundary arrangements. So you're not talking an A-class block in terms of its dimensions. Now, here's the thing. Does that matter? What do you reckon? Roland, I'm going to put that straight to you. Do you think that matters, that the block is not going to be an A-class block? And forgive me, I am just on my laptop today, so I'm going to have to flick back and forth. Roland, you reckon it's all good? So no issues at all if we have to have a strange shaped block? And others, feel free to chime in as well. So I'll give you an example. On my very, very first deal, we're going back a while now, my wife was very nervous about it because she said, why would anyone want a battle axe block? Why would anyone want one of these blocks where you go down the back and you have this little block tucked away in the rear? And the first thing you need to think of is that, number one, not everyone has the same taste. Many people want street frontage, yes, but many people want privacy and do like those blocks at the back. And the answer to does it matter is, well, that depends. Have you factored it into your feasibility? Because if you've done your pricing based on the assumption that the block is just as good as the block next door, which is also 400 square meters, but it's a 10-meter wide frontage, 40 meters deep, so a very typical style block, then it's a problem. Because no, you're not going to get the same amount for that block. Because number one, if it's that standard style of block, there's a lot of building designs that are already available for that. They can go to any builder. So there's very little friction, very little resistance. It's an easy thing for them to do. As soon as you have a small block that is unusual shaped, it now requires custom design. So things get a bit more complicated. So that might drop out some of your first home buyers that just sits as a bit uncomfortable for them. So it doesn't necessarily matter so long as you have factored it in your feasibility and you're realistic about how long it's going to take to sell it and what you're going to get for it. That's the truth around whether it matters. So as you can see on this one here, it's definitely not an A-class 400 square meter block. If it was this size and if it was this shape and 2,000 square meters, it wouldn't really matter. But when you are talking a block where you're really having to deal with all of the setbacks on all the sides as to what you can build here, it really does matter. So in this, we first of all need to be mindful of, if this can be subdivided, then we're not creating an A class block. We are creating a B class block. So we need to factor that in when we do our pricing. Okay, secondly, what else do you see there in terms of how would we actually make that happen? So assuming it can be subdivided, how is that going to happen? What challenges have we got for that back house? Yep, Roland, yep, might negatively affect the price. Okay, what about the back house? What are the challenges we've got with the back house? And not only challenges, but what additional costs would we need to allow for with that back house? I'll flick it back and I'll give you a moment. So hints are, think of access, think of servicing. And this is just a very rough estimate on where that boundary would be. So just be mindful of that, in that it's probably more over here. Very, very rough. Come on, guys, dig deep here. What challenges might we have with that back block? All right, looks like I'm gonna have to start giving some answers. Driveway, there we go. All right, so yes, driveway. All right, so first of all, the existing driveway is not gonna work. So that's done. So we're gonna have to rip up all this concrete and we're gonna have to do a new driveway over on the side here. Then you've got to look at things like, okay, we've got a carport here. Will that existing carport work with that new access, even if we can sort a boundary here where it could stay? And I can tell you the answer is no. The way this carport is built, there are poles all along here. So the idea of getting side access into it is not a possibility. So in terms of car accommodation for this property here, something needs to be sorted out for that. There needs to be an alternate solution for the car accommodation. And then servicing. So services, I know that the existing sewer connection for this house is actually over here. Now that's not available on any maps. That's been discovered by going on site and talking with the owner. And you could do a request for the services plan from the local council, but he actually knew where the existing sewer connection was. So the existing sewer connection being over here, most likely then runs down the front here. Well, that's not going to work either. So we're going to have to do a new sewer connection. Fairly high likelihood that the water might be a similar situation. So we're going to have to realign those services to keep it within this new block. So none of those are problems, but they've just got to be factored in and they're going to be costs. Okay, so that's the, I'll go back there to make sure. Yep, sewer connection could be difficult. There's a long delay from when we post messages until when you're seeing them. Okay, thanks for that. I appreciate that. All right, so can this thing be subdivided? Look, the answer is yes, it can be. And you might say, well, why? What about the frontages? Well, this is where there can be leniency in these sorts of blocks when you've got enough width further back, when you've got enough average width, and the size of the block allows for it as well. So we're not going to get too deep into that, but just know that it is possible, so long as the block is big enough and that it does fan out wider, so your average lot size is acceptable. Now, with that being said, I don't see any way that this one is going to get done without having a shared driveway at the front. That's, a shared access point. So most likely looking at that crossover remaining somewhat similar, but then here, splitting off to an access for the rear block and then an access for the front block. So not that that's a huge thing, but it is still another sort of chink in the armor as to the quality of the blocks, because ultimately people want their own driveway. They're not having to share it with anyone else. There's no concern over if it's damaged, who's going to foot the bill, and is the neighbor not going to look after it? So there's all of those things that do play into it. Is it a huge thing? No, but it is a thing. So that is something we need to factor in, again, that it's not an A-class front block and it's not an A-class situation at the rear as well. Doesn't mean there's not a buyer for it. Doesn't mean it's not good value, but we do need to factor that into the numbers. So with a bit of mucking around with this boundary here, you would be able to sort car accommodation here, whether it be a case of a carport in here or maybe down the side. This little thing here can definitely be removed. And you'd be able to keep the pool as well. So then this rear property still has a nice green backyard, still has a pool, and you've still got a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom upstairs, but then they've also got living downstairs as well. So this is still going to end up being on like a 600 square meter block. So this is actually still quite an attractive property. We just need to factor in those other things when it comes to pricing it at the end. Any questions on that so far? And noting that there's a delay in the comments coming through, so I'll just check back from time to time. But if you've got any questions so far, let me know. So let's check out the servicing. All right. What do we see here, guys? What challenges do you see? What opportunities do you see? So just highlighting that this is the property in question here. We've got the water coming up in blue, finishing here with multiple connections coming off the end of the line. And we've got the sewer coming up here. There's a manhole, what looks like probably on the footpath there. And coming up here, splitting off into house connections for these 3 here. And there's also a sewer main coming up here, but then that is inside those property boundaries all the way over to the neighboring property here. So what do you see? Well, I know, Roland, you already mentioned sewer connection could be difficult. So look, the good news here is because the block slopes towards the front and that's where the sewer is, then it's actually not too bad. We do obviously need an additional connection here. So it's a question of do these pipes have the capacity? Can it just be split off the existing connection? This council tends to support that. So I don't think we would have an issue there, but it's obviously something we would check. Most likely splitting off here and another connection coming here, being run up underneath the driveway to the side of the driveway up to the rear of the property and then being connected into the house. Water, same situation. We've got the end of the line here. At face value, I don't see any issues with us being able to get an additional water connection. What is interesting is if this map is accurate, the property connection for this block actually crosses across the front of the neighboring property, which is very unusual. So I wouldn't be shocked if that is actually accurate, that if you were to subdivide this, that they would actually make you sort that out, because you should never have any services for a property running through a different property. And so that's this property's individual property connection running through the neighboring property. I'm going to guess that that's inaccurate, and Dollar Before You Digs can be inaccurate to that level of detail, but that's probably something that would need to be actually potholed, or at least, it's pretty simple to dig up the water, but identify physically where that water is, and most likely, if it is actually doing that, realigning it so that it's not going through the neighboring property. All right, so Roland, water connection means digging up the street. Sewer might need a manhole. Okay, cool. So I think I understand why you're thinking that. It is a bit tricky with Dial Before You Digs to know exactly where the connection is. I would venture a guess that that water is actually in the footpath. I don't believe that is in the road, but we would want to confirm that. And the sewer, I presume you're guessing that because we would need to split off the main over here. So look, there is a chance. I don't think we would need to do a manhole, but I could be wrong. It's definitely one there that's a bit touch and go. So that is something we would factor in as a possibility. Yep, excellent. All right, 4 points to Roland. Very quiet from everybody else. Love to get some questions and some feedback and some answers from you. Remember, there is no wrong answer. Well, actually, technically, there can be wrong answers with this, but I'd rather you put it out there and go through the learning experience. If you're sitting there keeping that all to yourself, it does not engage your mind and your learning as much as if you get involved in the conversation. Okay, so sewer and water, good news is it's achievable. Maybe some challenges, but I'm not overly alarmed there. Stormwater, no issues there. It slopes towards the road, so our legal point of discharge will be at the road. NBN, Okay, very surprisingly, this map suggests that there is no NBN in the street. I find that hard to believe. But if that were the case, then we'd be looking at Telstra, which there definitely is Telstra. But I am going to guess that this map has not been updated because, yeah, given the location of this, that would be highly, highly irregular if there was actually no NBN in place. But either way, we know connection is possible because here is the Telstra network. Okay, so from a servicing perspective, we know that water and sewer can be done. A couple of questions around how it's going to be done, but it definitely can be done and not in any kind of a too troublesome way. Stormwater, we know, is not an issue because the property slopes towards the street. And so we've got our legal point of discharge at the street. Communication, question mark on whether it's NBN or Telstra. I would assert that it'll be NBN, but it's really not very much consequence as to whether it is NBN or Telstra. The bottom line is we know that we can service this property. Okay, questions before we get into the feasibility, or any comments or thoughts? Now, there is actually more to this deal that I will show you later once negotiations are done on the deal, because there are more factors, but I just can't really share those just at the moment. But yeah, one of the things that I mentioned in the emails is about blocks at the end of the streets and elevation. So elevation is typically considered to be a good thing. And typically it improves the quality of the property if it is elevated. People tend to pay more for things that are elevated than they do if they are down in a low section of a street or a low section of the suburb. That being said, if you're elevated, you can see a lot more. The question is, what are you seeing? Because if what you're seeing is not aesthetically pleasing, it is not always a positive thing. And you can't control your neighbors. So there's a hint. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that elevation is typically a good thing, but not always a good thing. All right, let's jump into the feasibility. Okay, so we are talking a 1 to 2. Timeframes lead in, I think 8 months is fairly fine. We are talking code accessible development. It really should not be much of an issue to get that through. Construction period, 4 months would be plenty, and titling period, 4 months should be fine as well. But as I always say, for a 1 to 2, especially a first one, I would suggest never allowing less than 18 months. So I'm just going to boost that up. And the other thing you need to think of too is it's all well and good to go, okay, lead in period 8 months. Well, let's have a look at where we are in the year now. We're in July. So where does 8 months get us to? It gets us a couple of months into the new year. Well, that's interesting because December, forget it. You may as well count that as a lost month. January, may as well count that as a lost month. Why? Because coming into Christmas, council is so hell-bent on getting everything out that they've already received that if you haven't submitted anything or got it into council before December, you may as well say you haven't submitted it until the new year. So December and January are basically write-offs because of the times that the councils and all the consultants and everyone shut down. So that probably would be more accurate to say, would be more accurate to leave that as it was and just make that 10 months to factor in the fact that the DA process is most likely going to go through the Christmas period. Might get a win and it might squeeze it out early because of Christmas, but we do need to factor that in. Okay, so buffer, I typically start at 20% on these sorts of projects, and that's a 20% buffer on construction, not on all costs. Now, I'm going to suggest, and I'll tell you that this is where I went in at on this property, that about $1 million. So $1 million purchase price. All right, now, because we are doing rear blocks, everything gets a little bit more expensive because your new connections are up the back. So the sewer as a FISO number, I am going to suggest 20,000. Because maybe we do need to do a manhole, but we definitely need to run it up the back. Water, I think 10 is fine. So as you can see on the side there, we normally allow 5,000 per additional connection, which sometimes honestly actually can be more than you need for a normal standard connection. But again, we do need to run it up the back. Stormwater really shouldn't have much of an allocation there. Power and telecoms, because it is a rear lot, we definitely are going to have to do design. If it's 2 front lots and you just plug and play, don't necessarily need it. But because we're needing to run it up the rear lot, there is definitely going to be design involved. So if you have a look at the recommendations I've put there, I've said 2K for communication and power, 2.5 for adding a property pole. That's assuming it's all at the front. So if we are talking the back, now we've got our electrical engineer allowance down the bottom. Look, I'm going to suggest 10,000. Again, remember, these are all just preliminary numbers. I would then be running these past my consultants to check them. House demo, we're not demolishing a house, but we may need to demolish that carport and build a new one, but I'll take care of that further down. Erosion and sediment control, it's a normal provision. Rear access driveway, we are going to need it, so I'll leave that there. Earthworks, well, that one is a question mark. So what we could do here on this block is we could just leave the contours as they are, and that could be dealt with at the building phase. And you'll often hear me say to remove as many objections as possible and to do as much work as you can during the subdivision so your product is completely ready. I guess the one time where that is not the case is if there's question marks around what the best way to do that for the build would be. So if the block is designed in a way where potentially it's got to be split level or something like that, in my opinion, you're better off not doing it during the subdivision phase and allowing them to do it as part of the build, because the chances of you getting it just right for their build pretty close to impossible if you don't already have their house design. So in this one here, that's something we would look at. There's a bit of a slope. It is raised. I would think that we're probably just best leaving it as it is. It's not a severe slope. And if they want to do any cut and fill when they build, they can do it themselves. That's what I think would be the best approach with this block, which when I can show you photos and videos, it'll hopefully make more sense. Footpath, no. Seepage pit, no. Oh, sorry. So yeah, deleting earthworks. Turf, just a provisional amount. Retaining walls, well, if we're not doing the earthworks, then there shouldn't need to be any retaining. So for now, I'll remove that. Fire hydrant, there's a possibility we may need a fire hydrant. So I haven't actually checked where the closest fire hydrant is, but unless it's right in the footpath out the front, then there's a chance the rear one may need it. So I am going to, what do I put in here as the provisional amount? I've said 28 if required at the back. So we'll put that in there. That's an ouch. Fencing, okay, so if we work on the standard fencing, so we've got 50, call it 70, 30, so we've got 100 meters of fencing. To fence off that new block. Just delete these ones here. Tree clearing, none. Initial reno, all right, now this is a question mark. Okay, so then there's the question of what do we want to do with the house? And I'm just going to flick over to see if there's any questions in the meantime. Electricity, yes, Roland, good point. We didn't cover that in... doesn't look like we have the electricity in there for some reason. And I do not recall. Yeah, there we are. Overhead power lines. Bang. There you go. All right, but that's where the overhead power lines end. You can see that's a singular pole there with a property connection there and a property connection coming up here. You can't see it on the map, but I know that's where that one comes in. So another property pole would most likely be needed, or underground. I'm going to suggest it'll be underground. And that's what I've allowed for in that in those numbers. So yeah, good on you, mate. I don't know why that the Energix one isn't in there. Actually, I do, because it's overhead power. But yes, we didn't talk about that, so good on you. So the initial reno for this thing here, so look, it's actually, they've done a fairly good job upstairs already. Downstairs definitely needs a fair bit of work. And then there is the carport as well. So it's really a question of how far this thing would go, but there's some structural stuff that this thing needs done. And I don't mean, sorry, not structural, but utility stuff that needs to be done, like the gutters need to be replaced, they're rusted through. There's some timber that's been allowed to rot, and there's some sections that do need to be redone. So it's definitely an estimate, but I would say that we're still talking, even though upstairs is done, the bathroom's done, I'm going to say we're still looking at about 120,000 would be my initial estimate for what that reno is going to be. Okay, now all of this should remain relatively the same. We're only doing one block, so the contributions should be right. Surveyor, electrical engineer we've allowed for because we do need the design. Town planner, council, plan sealing, pegging, civil consultants, your engineer. Pardon me, accounting, bookkeeping. Definitely don't need any traffic reports. Where did I see that? There we are. And did I see a tree retention? Yep, no tree retention. Okay, we're all pretty good there. All right, so real estate commission, 2.8%, that's including GST, so that's 2.5% plus GST, which is fairly standard. Legals on sale, I'm going to allow $5,000 for either a break or for paying my broker to sort the finance out. Okay, and then this is where we have a look at what this block would be worth. Now, the house I'm going to put in at lot 1 and the block at 2. Now, the house, once renovated, that should be, I'd say, about 1.1. Now, that definitely needs more substantiation, but that's my initial run of numbers on that. Now, the block of land, even though it is a B grade block, I'd say we're still probably talking something starting with a 7. Now, that may be too ambitious, okay? That does need further substantiation. There's a bit going on there, but I'm just going to have a look at what that looks like, because what I want to see here is, hey, is this worth going closer? Is this worth pushing further with? And then we can actually look at, are these numbers that we can actually achieve? Okay, so interest rate, 6.5% seems about right. 80% lend on the beginning. I'll do it as though it's I'm either funding it or it's a joint venture, so I'm not putting any interest rate in there for cash for an investor. All right, let's have a look. Where are we sitting? Okay, so it's sitting at a profit of 215,000 and a 14.54% ROI, return on cost. Now, what is our minimum acceptable return for a subdivision, guys? What is the minimum acceptable return that I teach for a full subdivision project? Let me know. Now, I know there's delay in the comments, so I'll keep going, but I'll let you do that. So we'll keep looking at the levers here. So, okay, number one, we know that I'm at this point still making fairly broad estimates here. You know, it's a little bit harder for me to estimate off the top of my head that house because of I don't exactly know how that car parking situation is going to be resolved just yet. And what I would want to bring out some of the agents that I trust to have a look at that have a good pulse, finger on the pulse in the market there, just because there's a few things going on there with, yes, it's elevated, but you know, what you're seeing is not entirely a plus. It is going to be that rear block, but it's still going to have a nice backyard. It's still going to have the pool. Those are all good things. So I believe that that is achievable. It potentially could be conservative, but there's a bit going on. So I'm going to want to talk to some people that are selling that sort of a house in that market right now. The land as well, I believe that that is achievable. It could go either way. It could be that I'm a little bit conservative there, or I could be overestimating a little bit there. You know, why I believe that's very achievable is because of what I've been contracting land for in suburbs not too far away. So that gives me good confidence in that number and has me think, okay, maybe even it is conservative. But then there's other things going on there too, where it's got to be, got to be real about the kind of block it is there as well. So that's going to require some further attention. But if it's starting at 15%, and I know that there's possibly some room to move on those numbers, then okay, I'm interested. The other possibility here is that it may just need to be at a lower price. Okay, so looks like it would probably need to be something like 925 based on those numbers. Whoops. Yeah, there you go. So about 925,000 is what would get us to 20%. And I presume you've already put that in the comments for me. Yes, you have. Very good. All right. So if my numbers work out to be correct on the sales end there, we're looking at needing to buy it at around 925 to get that 20% ROI. So with this sort of thing here, I would, with that feasibility, I would want to contract it ASAP, even if the best price I can get it for is a mil. Okay, at a mil, it's obviously not an ROI that I'm happy with based on these numbers, but there's still a lot of assumptions being made here. Okay, so when we look at this, all right, sewer and water, I could be overestimating. Rear access driveway, probably not overestimating there these days with concrete. May not need a fire hydrant. There's 28,000 right there. And then looking at the initial reno, well, you know, when I get out there with the agents, the opinion on that property could be very, very different. It may not need that much of a reno. You know, and there's also different options there as to with that living downstairs, can I turn it into a dual living situation and add that extra premium value to it by offering that sort of a dual living situation? So there's definitely plenty of numbers here that I know there's the potential that they have some movement. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to end up good. I'm not going cash unconditional on that offer, but I'm willing to contract it at that number if I have to. If that's the best number I can get, I'd be willing to contract it at that point, get it off the market, get control of it, and do my due diligence once I've got it under contract and firm up all those numbers. Because you can see here, like even if I'm slightly out, so let's put this number back to a mil. Let's say they're agreeable at a mil. Given my uncertainty around these numbers, you can see it wouldn't take much. As an example, and you know, it's conceivable that I could be out by this much based on what I know is happening in the area. You know, there's another way of it being achieved. Now, obviously, this is dangerous if you're not being sensible. This is not the way you do a feasibility where you go, oh, what do I need to sell it for? Okay, well, as long as I can get that, then let's go ahead. And then you just go ahead with it and just go, oh, well, I won't sell it unless I can get these numbers. That's not how it works. The market is what the market is, and the market will pay what the market will pay. But the only reason I'm doing it that way and showing you that example is because I know that those numbers, there's a bandwidth there. All right, I'm not certain enough on those numbers yet in this particular suburb to be able to say 100% that's exactly the accurate numbers. I could be wrong the other way too, though, as we look deeper into it. It can go both ways. But as I say, if there's even a sniff that it's got legs, get it under contract. You don't want to go spending hours of time and consultants' fees and all those sorts of things on a property you haven't even got under contract and have control over. Evelyn, so contract would be subject to due diligence. Not necessarily. It's we could achieve the same thing in other ways. So when you're talking big development sites, the negotiations can look a little bit different to when you're talking smaller infill sites. Because selling this property, they may not necessarily be looking at it as we're selling a development site. These guys are. You know, they've had that conversation with them. They know there's that potential. But if people aren't selling their site for that, you don't really want to draw their attention to the fact that, hey, this could be developable, because that might increase what they think they should be getting for the property. So on smaller sites, I tend to use other clauses which basically achieve the same thing, which might be a building and pest clause. But it's important that it's worded appropriately, not just putting the date on the contract saying, you know, getting an inspection done by then, because then that falls back to the standard T's and C's of the contract, which are not as flexible. Whereas an appropriately worded clause for building and pest can give you a lot more discretion. So that's one example. Finance is another example. But you're basically looking at clauses and conditions that give you the ability to exit the contract if you need to, when you're going through that research period, that due diligence period. Because yeah, the actual due diligence clauses tend to be accepted less, not that they are not accepted, but they are accepted less in your infill areas. And again, if it's not necessarily obvious that it's being viewed as a development site, you don't want to necessarily bring attention to the fact that it has development potential. Good question, though. Good question. Okay. final questions, guys, and thoughts on this one. What would you do? How would you go about this deal? Do you think there's a deal here to be done? What would you want to be finding out in your due diligence? What are the important things for you? I'm just going to change how this is working. There we go. So yeah, if this was you, what would your next steps be? What do you think the next steps should be? Now, obviously it said there that I would get it under contract, but what else? What do you think the next steps need to be? Just realized that probably looks like I'm shotting vodka, because that is normally what I drink a scotch out of. That was water. So yeah, next steps on that deal. And this is good practice, because it's not until you get into this position where you actually have to make the decisions as to what's next. And I promise you, early on, when you're doing your due diligence on deals and getting deals under contract, your learnings go through the roof at that point. But it definitely can become quite complicated. And I probably haven't appreciated that until more recent years, because I've done it so many times, but appreciate the order in which you should do things for a number of reasons. One, because you don't want to be spending money unnecessarily. But two, you need to protect your time. You need to protect your time. There's no point doing, item C if it's dependent on item A, and if it's absolutely irrelevant based on the outcome of item A. Do A, pardon me, and if A qualifies, then worry about B and C. Chat with real estate agents. Yeah, absolutely. So I would be getting it under contract. And then, some of these things happen simultaneously. I'd be then putting it in front of my consultants to see what opportunities and what risks they can see with it. So both from town planning and engineering. And at the same time, yes, I would be meeting with my agents out there to actually get really clear on what those sales numbers are. Because as we've gone through, that's actually where the biggest risk is. If we're out on construction by 10%, in this feasibility, construction was around 200,000, I think. If we're out by 10%, that's 20,000. Okay, the project can absorb that. In fact, I think we had 30,000 in the construction buffer. If we're out by 20% on the sales realizations, that's devastating. That's very problematic. So yes, absolutely, solidify those servicing questions, and also, are we going to need to retain? Are we going to need to do earthworks? Get confirmation on that. But then, what's this product worth? Because neither of them are cookie cutter. That's why it's a bit harder to price. If it was cookie cutter stuff, 10 by 40, all that sort of thing, much easier. Clarify the fire hydrant and rev options. Absolutely, yep. That would be one of the things I'd be doing with the agents out there, is actually talking through my ideas as to the way to maximize the value of that property, but also then get their ideas. Are they seeing something in the market that's in high demand at the moment? Get clear on the numbers for the potential sale prices. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, definitely the next steps. And obviously, as that happens, getting confirmation on all those numbers, updating the feasibility, getting clear on where it's all sitting. And one of the really crucial things is communicate with the vendors on the way through. If you get a property under contract and let's say you have a 4-week conditional period, if you just go radio silent for 4 weeks and they don't hear from you, the ability to renegotiate at the end if you need to is very, very hard, because there's no warmth there, there's no relationship there. You haven't kept them in the loop. It's just going to catch them off guard. And like in this case here, it's like, okay, we're at a mill, and then I disappear for 4 weeks, and then I come back and I go, I need $75,000 discount, thanks. Probably not going to say yes, because it's like, where'd that come from? You haven't said anything. You haven't raised any concerns. Nothing. You said $1 million was fine, and now all of a sudden, with no warning, you say it's not. So keep in contact. Find reasons to be in contact, and obviously you're going to spend some time on site with them. I find it very helpful to communicate on the way through, keeping them informed. If things are coming up that are raising concerns over the numbers, it's better to break that to them earlier and allow them to kind of familiarize with that situation. And you also get a read on them too. Is this something where there's some room to move? Is this something they're willing to work through with you? Or is it a hard no, look, just get lost? No, get lost, not interested, blah, blah. Don't waste your time. Don't waste their time. Don't waste your time. But if it's a conversation of they understand and they're like, okay, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, we knew that. Or, that's interesting. Yeah, didn't realize that cost that much. Okay, we'll need to have a look at our numbers as well. You know, if the conversation is a flowing conversation, they are open to that, then you've got a much better chance when you get to the end going, hey, look, all those things that we talked about, look, yeah, they have unfortunately come to a reality. Um, it's not a devastating difference to the numbers, like but we do need, yeah, to make it work to make the numbers work. We do need a bit of movement on price. So the absolute maximum our feasibility is saying we can purchase the property for to make it work is whatever it is 925,000. Is that something you could make work? And notice I didn't say, is that okay with you? I didn't say, is that a price you would like? You know, ask good questions, ask smart questions. Is that something you could make work? Is that something you could get okay with? Or whatever it might be. Careful in the questions you ask and the I guess the psychology behind them and the mindset that it encourages. Again, it's a problem solving mindset. It's, you know, is there something you could do that could make this work? All right. Final questions and thoughts on that one. I will keep you posted on this one. I do hope this turns into a deal. There's a bit of water to go under the bridge, but so this is one I am currently working through. And I'll just wait patiently since for whatever reason, YouTube's comments seem to be taking their sweet time coming through. On other news, I'll just give you a bit of a read on the market at the moment. Market is definitely moving in high and low. So it's been moving in the low sector, like the affordable sector, for quite some time. A lot of the time, even when media was reporting that the market was slow, in terms of affordable property, the market was actually still moving really quite well and increasing. But we are definitely starting to see some crazy record prices in not only development sites being sold, but also in some of the premium suburbs, some of the new builds and established builds that are getting sold. Some crazy record prices happening. So definitely a lot of movement happening in the market. And you know, when these things happen, more moves tend to happen. Obviously, got to be careful of what happens on the other side of that. As with everything, yeah, as the rubber band gets stretched, it tends to overcorrect. So as the market heats up, yes, there's absolutely opportunity during this period. But as I've talked about too, in terms of where we are in the real estate cycle, we do need to be mindful of that. That's not me saying stay out of the market at all. That is me saying make responsible decisions, buy well, and buy in a responsible way and finance in a responsible way. So you want to be the ones that make the money in this time and are okay and fine and ideally abundant when the market does have those corrections and in a place to take advantage of those corrections, because that's the way they should be viewed, as an opportunity, something to set yourself up to take the opportunity afterwards. Good on you, Roland. Okay, guys, that's a wrap for today. Thank you very much for your participation, and we will. I'll keep you posted on next week, actually, because I am going to be skiing next week. So I'll do my best to run a session. Whether or not that is live or I do a pre-recorded, I will keep you posted. But either way, keep in touch and see you soon. Good on you, Evelyn. Stick at it. I know there's plenty there. Lots to learn.